Spent all day yesterday talking about Lane Kiffin, but there were a bevy of other SEC coaching changes, whether there were hirings or firings on Sunday. Damn near half the conference changed, hired or fired their head coach on Sunday. Now, while Lane Kiffin drove all the headlines, there were other developments. Arkansas hires Ryan Silverfield. Doesn't seem or feel like a really popular hire with Razorback fans. We'll talk about that. Auburn hires Alex Golesh. It does feel like a popular hire for Auburn fans. Jon Sumrall is hired at Florida. Doesn't feel like a popular hire. Mark Stoops, the Kentucky head coach, is fired. Feels like a rather popular move. Pete Golding is hired as the head coach at Ole Miss after the Lane Kiffin debacle. I think people are really excited about that because there are quotes being attributed to Pete that were or weren't said about whether it was Lane Kiffin's office anymore. You could argue that there's a push to make it seem as if Pete mother effed Lane Kiffin on the way out the door. I don't know whether that's true or not. It feels probably unlikely because generally these coaches are under the guise that this is a small fraternity. You don't want to burn any bridges because you never know when you might need a job or work for somebody or need a recommendation. So you don't say, get the hell out of here, it's not your office anymore type stuff. That just doesn't seem likely to me. But if Ole Miss fans want to believe that, he said that, like, hey, go, more power to you. I want to talk about why I feel like Jon Sumrall is more of a slam dunk than Ryan Silverfield at Arkansas or Alex Golesh at Auburn. Alex Golesh had led a team in South Florida that should be really happy and excited about the way 2025 went because they were 7-6 his first two seasons and make the jump to 9-3 this year. And that's obviously it's a good situation to be in. And those 9-3, by the way, one is a loss on the road at Miami, who, depending on your view, should be in the conversation as a college football playoff team. A lot of Group of Five schools are going to lose that game. A lot of Group of Five schools aren't going to find success against, at the time, a top 5 team in the country on the road. And I think there's some of that needs to be said, by the way. Like, Mark Carney is the new head coach at Kent State, was the interim, got named the head coach this year. And if Mark Carney went 5-7 in his first season, and in a couple of years, should Purdue or Illinois or Rutgers, Maryland, somebody like that say, we want to take somebody from the MAC to the Big Ten, that's our guy. Fan bases will say, well, he went 5-7 in his first year. And sure, that is true, and numbers never lie, but context does matter in a situation where it's like, hey, he went 5-7, yes. They'd gone 1-11 and 0-12 before that. Plus, Kent State has a schedule of, by God, we need a track and field program. So they played 3 bye games from power conference teams that you're just not going to win. And so when a third of your schedule is made up of games that you're not going to win, I don't know that you can hold that against somebody like Alex Golesh. This year, they start the season, Boise State, at Florida, at Miami. They are probably designed to go 1-2 in that stretch, and instead they went 2-1. So that is hey, kudos to you, Alex Golesh. Now, their other losses in conference come to Memphis, a 3-point loss on the road, and to Navy, a 3-point loss on the road. I don't know if Auburn fans can appreciate the idea of hiring a coach that was close but not close enough in their conference before they got to Auburn. But that was sort of the knock. That was sort of the knock on Hugh Freeze, was he continually was like, we're close. I know we're close. Like, yeah. And that's the problem, brother. Like, you were close, but never got over the hump. You were close, but never close enough. And so I think there is a hint of irony there of Auburn hiring. And believe me, I think you can torpedo damn near any college coaching hire. I'm going to do it potentially tomorrow, talking about Pat Fitzgerald and Michigan State. You can torpedo any of these decisions and just say, well, that was dumb, and I'll explain why. But there is and I've mentioned this before, that like you want the opposite of what you just had. Every fan base is like, okay, the problem with Hugh Freeze was that we were close but not close enough. South Florida goes 9-3 this year, and their 2 conference losses that keep them out of the college football playoff discussion and out of conference championship discussion are they lost 2 road games by 3 points apiece. That doesn't feel as if it's the opposite of what they had in Hugh Freeze. So I find that decision to hire Alex Golesh, obviously, and I think this is kind of the same thing as the NFL draft, where if every NFL draft prognosticator says, like, this is the order in which the quarterbacks should go. And if everybody agrees, like, Jamarcus Russell is this amazing prospect that the Oakland Raiders have to take number 1, and then they do it, and he sucks, and everybody goes, how in the hell did they draft that guy number 1 overall? It's like, well, wait a second. At the time, everybody was in agreement that he was the right choice. And so I think there's some of that right now. There are a lot of people who believe Alex Golesh is the right choice for Auburn. There are a lot of people who, actually there are fewer people, who believe Ryan Silverfield is the right choice for Memphis. Arkansas fans immediately, they hire Ryan Silverfield and like, he went 7th, 8th, 4th, 3rd, and 6th in the American. We hired a guy who was going to be on the hot seat at a group of 5 job. And I don't think that that's crazy, by the way. I think, as I mentioned, I think you can torpedo and find a reason to hate any coaching hire outside of if Alabama was going to reanimate the corpse of Bear Bryant. And even then, you'd be like, well, he don't know NIL and transfer portal. You can do this to anybody. But I feel much more confident in Jon Sumrall at Florida than I would for Alex Golesh at Auburn, Pete Golding at Ole Miss, Ryan Silverfield at Arkansas, or whoever the hell takes over at Kentucky, which we'll get to in a second. Because from where I sit, and I think you can follow this logic, and I think it would be hard to disagree with, there are a lot of dudes who have put together one-hit wonder seasons at group of 5 schools, turned that into a Power 4 job, and then spectacularly flamed out. That you're like, how in the hell did that coach, who at my school didn't appear to know his ass from a pocket full of sand, win 11 games at this group of 5 school, but then got to my school and couldn't put 2 drives together? I don't think you have that with Jon Sumrall. So I don't understand I do understand a little bit the frustration from Florida fans, because one, it sure feels like they struck out on Lane Kiffin, that they swung and they missed. And you'll have that. And I don't think Lane Kiffin is crazy for taking the LSU job over the Florida job. Maybe that'll be a fun off-season exercise, like ranking the jobs in the SEC, because I enjoy being bitched at by Arkansas fans who will tell you that's a top 15 job in America. Like, it's hardly a top 15 job in the SEC, brother. But Jon Sumrall has done spectacular work at 2 different places. He's been a head coach for 4 years, which obviously isn't a large body of work, but he's won double-digit games in 3 of those 4 seasons. And the year he didn't win double-digit games, he won 9. So the idea that he can win 12 games and 11 games, that he can go 23-4 at Troy and then go 19-7 at Tulane, I think should give Florida a lot of optimism, frankly, is the word that I would use. Is if he can do those things at Troy and Tulane, why shouldn't I feel confident that he's not going to do it with us? Why should I believe that he's going to falter when he takes over our program? Because there are a lot of guys that can have really good 1 seasons at their group of 5 schools. Before I did sports talk radio and all that stuff, I worked in the country music format. And there are a lot of people who will tell you that anybody can write one good song. Anybody can write. Everybody walking the earth right now has one good song in their soul. They just got to find it. And I think that's somewhat similar in the college football coaching ranks of there are a lot of dudes who can have one good season, but can you do it year after year after year? There's difference between doing it once and becoming George freaking Strait, if I can use a country music reference. I think it's much more likely that Jon Sumrall becomes George freaking Strait than he does Daryl Hazel. Or pick anybody else who you thought, this guy is the next hot young commodity, and then did not do anything with that opportunity. Because if he can do it at two different places in the group of five, to me, that would feel, and I feel like this is like easy to connect these dots, that makes it much more likely that he's going to do it at the Power 4 level than if, and I could be insanely wrong about this, and we'll have to revisit it at some point, that when Jon Sumrall inevitably gets fired by Florida and Alex Golesh wins a national championship at Auburn, I can sit here and say, well, hell, I got that one wrong. But if you win 23 games at Troy in 2 years and 20 games at Tulane in 2 years, that to me is a better indicator of future success than going 7-5, 7-5, 9-3 at South Florida. And make no mistake about it, South Florida was bad before Alex Golesh got there. And Auburn isn't bad by any stretch of the imagination right now. The defense is good. The offense, there are pieces there that they can work with. I don't think, depending on how the transfer portal goes, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that Auburn starts 2026 as a top 25 ranked team, as one of those teams that we talk about in June and July going, is there a pathway for Auburn to be in the SEC championship game or a college football playoff team? I don't think that's unreasonable to say. But I think farther on down the line, I feel much more confident that Jon Sumrall is going to be really successful at Florida than Ryan Silverfield is going to be at Arkansas. To me, I wouldn't be super inspired by that hire. I think that there are some advantages there of going from Memphis, which is essentially just really East Arkansas and really North Mississippi, and going to Fayetteville allows him to be super familiar with that recruiting area and help build back some of those that recruiting base, truthfully. I think there's some reason to be optimistic there, but there's not that track record of, holy hell, this guy is going to build a gigantic winner at Arkansas. I don't feel that way. I wouldn't be super optimistic about Pete Golding at Ole Miss. Just my initial read on it. I don't really have a whole lot to go off of that. But then it comes to Mark Stoops and Kentucky. And I find that situation really interesting because, and supposedly they've worked out a deal, but this to me just shows that the money in the SEC is not real. Mark Stoops' contract says if he gets fired, he is owed his buyout in the next 60 days. So basically by like Martin Luther King Jr. Day, he's owed a check for $38 million, which is a lot of cash. That is an inordinate amount of money. I don't think you appreciate how much money $38 million is, and they owe it to him in the next 60 days. Now, supposedly there is a deal in place where it's spread out over a number of years and not by the national championship game, but there is a lot of money. And when Kentucky is participating in that same arena that LSU did, that LSU, I've sat here and told you, I think James Franklin got Brian Kelly fired because James Franklin's gigantic screw-ups at Penn State, and they said, we're willing to pay whatever it takes to get rid of this dude, and LSU went, well, hell, if they're willing to do it, so are we. But I ain't going to let the athletic director be pick that next head coach, though. I can't appreciate making fun of the Louisiana governor enough. If Kentucky's willing to play in that same arena, how serious are they about hiring a big-time coach. And whether that is Will Stein, the Oregon offensive coordinator, Brian Hartline, the Ohio State offensive coordinator, whether it's Jon Gruden. I feel like Jon Gruden's going to get mentioned with every SEC opening that isn't LSU, Texas, Oklahoma, Georgia. I would say Tennessee, but I can't say Tennessee. Basically, Texas, Oklahoma, Georgia. I don't think they could. LSU's obviously. For about 2/3 of the league, Jon Gruden is going to be mentioned as a potential candidate. Is Jon Gruden going to be the next head coach of Kentucky? I wouldn't count on it. But is Kentucky one of those situations where they paid so much money to get rid of their current head coach that they kind of got to shortchange a little bit on what they're going to pay the next guy, because we are now down $38 million that we hadn't budgeted for? I think that's a really interesting one to watch, because it is a potentially more desirable name, or potentially more desirable job, I should say, than some people might give it credit for. And I think you can talk, I think you can talk a lot of coaches into taking bad jobs because the egos are so big. They have been treated like they are gods among men for so long. They're like, well, hell yeah, I can win the SEC at Kentucky. Can you? Somebody is going to take the Northwestern job someday and go, I can win a Big Ten championship at Northwestern. Can you? I can win the Big 12 at Iowa State. William Howard Taft was the president the last time that Iowa State won a conference championship. The idea that you're going to be the person to do the thing that the last 30 guys have not been able to do doesn't feel super likely. And yet there will be people who will tell you that the Kentucky job is really attractive. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. I think that it isn't so much the rest of the SEC that needs to look out for who Kentucky hires. It is the Cincinnati's, Michigan States of the world that have done a bang-up job in the past of cleaning up the second-tier recruits in the state of Ohio. The schools that didn't get the 5-star recruits out of the state of Ohio, but got low 4 stars and high 3 stars, turned them into really good players. Because if you look at it, Michigan State made the college football playoff in the 4-team era because they were recruiting the hell out of Ohio. Cincinnati did the same thing when Mark Stoops was winning 9 games a season at Kentucky, which is like winning 15 games a year in the regular season at Ohio State, Notre Dame, and Texas, is because they were recruiting the state of Ohio. So there are like some dominoes that fall depending on who gets hired at Kentucky about how people should feel about Jeff Brom at Louisville, how you should feel at Cincinnati, Michigan State, West Virginia, Pitt. I think that is a really interesting domino that can be attributed to who Kentucky hires, which also I think hinges on who's willing to take maybe a little less money because they just spent $38 million. And again, there is reports that it's been spread out over several years and not the next 60 days. But that's still $38 million that you hadn't accounted for that you got to find somewhere. So the SEC coaching situation, for the most part, has been settled. But I think it's still really, really interesting to look at because there are a lot of balls being juggled right now. And we're not going to have the answers for a hot second. But the chances that this is everybody hired difference makers at their programs, that all 4 of the coaches are going to be someday like, wow, what an offseason, feels insanely likely. So at some point, we're going to sit here and judge and go, how in the hell did Arkansas hire Ryan Silverfield? Or you can do that with Florida and Jon Sumrall, Auburn, Ole Miss. We're going to get that opportunity, and I look forward to those days because it sure is fun to second-guess other people and say, man, what an idiot, while I sit here in this spare bedroom in my house. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. I appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you get all the great college football content we're pumping out. If you are listening on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. I'll see you tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Huddle.